I wanted to do 4 artworks about people that I knew personally who had been killed by police. And this was the first one. So I started with a 4 by 4 inch sketch, and I decided to keep it really as raw as possible. So I took the sketch and then I went and I scanned the sketch and I just blew it up bigger. So if you look at this, it's actually perfectly square. And so I took the sketch, I blew it up, and then I traced it onto a new surface, which I use like a certain type of paper, fiberless paper, to make a watercolor. It's a mixed media watercolor. And because it's done in such stick figure way, just really raw, just to get the ideas out, I also decided to kind of flesh it out with a personal essay about my friend. So this friend's name is Prince Jones, or was Prince Jones, and he was a friend of mine at Howard University in the late 90s. And he was really popular on campus. He was really handsome. He was like a great guy. And, it was shocking for the friends to find out that he had been killed by police. We wondered what happened because he was such a polite person and a gentleman. And interestingly, Ta-Nehisi Coates, I believe he was a MacArthur Genius last year. He got that award. He also dedicated his book, that helped him to win that award, to Prince Jones as well. So it was more than me who was impacted by the loss of this friend. And the interesting thing about this particular friend is he was like really almost like this perfect guy. And, I know 4 people who were killed and they had very different personalities, very different stories. And, still, even with someone being nearly perfect and unarmed, the outcome was the same for all of the different guys. So this is Prince here. And then these are various scenes of him in his life, in his campus life. I mean, I just knew him as someone that I would run into and have lunch with occasionally, talk on the phone occasionally. So here we're having lunch at a really good restaurant called Soul Vegetarian, which was run by the Hebrew Israelites across from Howard University. I found out, after doing a little research online, that he had been most likely to become president when he was in high school. And this is interesting because it was long before Obama. But interestingly, Eric Holder was in office in Washington, D.C., and so there are actually photos of students protesting, and they have Eric Holder's name written on their signs. So at the time that I was making this work, Eric Holder was the Attorney General in Obama's administration. And then, some of the types of conversations that we would have would be about Black history and Black progress and Black politics. And so here I mentioned some intellectuals that we may have discussed at the time, such as Cornel West and Henry Louis Gates Jr., and some of the concepts or terms that we would, use: engagement, community power, dreams deferred, referencing Langston Hughes. Autobiography of a Contemporary Black Child was the name of a paper that he wrote at Howard. And Al Gore actually spoke at his funeral, so I have that represented. This is Rankin Memorial Chapel at Howard University's campus. And, I don't really like to show a moment of death in my work, but here I give an idea of the death of my friend. And he was on his way to visit his child's mother, baby mama, and his child, who was about 2 or 3 years old when he was killed. And he was actually shot, but driving away from the police, and he hit a tree. So I have him represented here in his SUV. And the place was called Sleepy Hollow, that he was in at the time of the crash. And I also have trees here, the poplar trees, referencing Billie Holiday's song Strange Fruit. So those are some things that are happening here. Maybe here he's with his girlfriend who was pregnant at some point in time at Barnes & Noble's in Georgetown, D.C. There's a Washington monument. Prince's name, represented with a figure that references a spiritual prince. And he was a personal trainer as his side job. And here I have him with his kid, and he was very religious. He was very Christian, so I just represent that as part of his life as well. And in this essay, I just talk about how the friends felt about him and how we were all so shocked and how we were so angry about what happened. And Actually, I'm not even sure if I wrote about this, but I went to a dinner that happened a few months or to a year after he was killed that was hosted by his mother. It was like a fundraiser to try to get, to generate more publicity about what happened and raise some money to, fight what had happened. And social media wasn't very big at the time. And, there were incidents that were getting greater press at the time, like Abner Louima in New York, and some other really, I hate to use the word high profile, but high profile news stories where the crimes were more vicious against the victims. So, and no one really knows what happened in a lot of these incidents. That's kind of the way it is. If there are no witnesses, it's always going to slant towards the cop. Pretty much always. And one of the things I've discovered in talking to parents of people who've lost someone to cops is that, and loved ones, is that it's really difficult to win a case against the police. You could spend $25,000 easily going to jail. You could, be fighting the system, and it really won't go anywhere. You really kind of have to be almost like what I've been told, a perfect victim in order to get justice. So my work is very narrative, and usually it's read from right to left if there's text on it. I mean, people can approach it and look at it different ways, but this one is definitely set up as a personal essay. It was like a 5-page essay that I wrote about this whole process of creating the artwork and getting the information. This was another friend that was killed by police. It happened in 1998, and the story that I initially heard was that my friend had died on the back of a police car seat from a heart attack, which we all thought was suspect. So many years passed when I decided to, make this second artwork about a friend. And I was talking on the phone to my friend Moni Jeffries, and she was really good friends with, okay, so that's Moni here. She's sort of represented there. There's not a direct likeness to the people, but this is Moni, and this is Justin, who was the person that I knew had a heart attack on the back of a police car. And then this is his friend, Jabari. And then this is me here. Well, it's not really me, but it's just representative, like us being like 19, 20-year-olds, and that we are listening to CDs and drinking wine and learning how to smoke cigarettes. So that's what we would do when he would come over and hang out with us. And so Moni contacted Jabari, and the three of us had a 3-way conversation about what happened, and there was so much more detail, so much more had come out. Justin's mother, her name is, her last name is Phoenix Smith. I forgot her first name at the moment. It's escaping me. Anyways, she had so much more detail. After his death, she actually formed the nonprofit organization to help support the victims of the families of people who lost relatives to the police and loved ones. And so I actually reached out to her on Facebook to just let her know that I made this artwork. Interestingly, when I started doing the research, I found out that I saw images of Quentin Tarantino holding pictures of Justin, which actually came from the obituary. I didn't actually use those images in the artwork. I kind of concentrated on the memories that I had of him. This artwork is called Klingon Cloak for a Black Paladin. And the reason it's called that is because, there's this idea, a Klingon cloak is something that makes you invisible in Star Trek. And, it's sort of a poetic way of talking about what if, there could have been a cloak for him not to be seen and to have died. Also, the Black Paladin is a reference to Henry Dumas, who was a writer who was killed by police in 1968. He was black. He was first published posthumously, I think I said that word right, by Toni Morrison, who called him a genius writer. And so it's such a great loss that he was killed in a case of mistaken identity. I think it was 1968. So here I just write about, the research. I include poetry. I cite, I actually have some endnotes here where I cite some other writers, including excerpts from Henry Dumas's own poetry and literature. There's even Rumia, Claudia Rankine, who wrote a book called Citizen, an American Lyric. And some rappers such as Rod Digga, they got together and created an album about police violence around 2000. And Justin's mom was able to get images of him in the video. which was great. It had Mos Def in it and a few other rappers who are very well known. So Justin talked about his friend, and I really wrote about, excuse me, their friendship and this loving relationship that they had at Friends, and the things that opened up Jabari's world. And so here, one of the moments that struck me in the conversation was that Jabari said that one morning Justin made breakfast for him, and he never had anyone, especially a guy, make breakfast for him. And so I thought that was a sweet moment to include here. So this is the breakfast. Here, these are mourners, and those are Egyptian mummies and Black Panthers, but I made them blue. That's a Klingon warship right there. That's NDRE, kind of referencing the music we would have been listening to at the time. And Jabari said that Justin once saved him from an attack where there were a bunch of guys who jumped him in a dorm room, and Justin took care of him and washed him and made sure that his wounds were okay and stayed with him the whole night because the hospital was really far away. And that's another thing that showed real friendship and care that I appreciated. So just kind of setting the scene here, I also show Washington, D.C., the Potomac River, and that's one of the monuments there. I can't remember which one, Jefferson maybe. And here I have us in a paddle boat, something we never did, but it's a painting. So I just wanted to show that we had fun together, we had good times, and at the end here I show a police helicopter, which at the end of his life he was chased by a police helicopter, and he was pulled over for driving with his high beams on, and it was his girlfriend's car. So I relate the story here through a poem that I wrote, and it's right in here. It's kind of a free verse type of poem, and so he was chased by the police. I guess he stopped. He did actually stop, but the report is that he got back in his car and he drove away because they wanted to say that it was stolen, and that something that happens when cars get stolen, something breaks, and that's why high beams might be on when one is driving. It was witnessed that he spit on the cops at some point, and then the next thing we know, he's at a gas station and the cops are there with him in the car, and I've kind of forgotten a little bit of the details right now, but he does end up on the ground dead at the gas station, and one of the police actually tries to administer CPR, and that is the end of the story as we know it. The family didn't press charges because, again, it was Jabari who said, the family decided that it would be such a difficult case that they probably wouldn't win. They were advised not to by attorneys because, again, it's like a person needs to be a perfect victim in order to actually win against the police. This artwork, I think it's called Dodge Magnum Full of Potting Soil. Sometimes I come up with these elaborate titles and then I forget them later. I have to go to my website and look up the titles sometimes. So this one is the third one about someone that I personally knew who was killed by police. Kind of a different set of circumstances than the other two friends. This one was a neighbor who was a sex offender. At least it was rumored that he was a sex offender by the women in my neighborhood. I actually approached them one day and they were standing around and talking about it, and they were upset. And a couple of them had daughters who were, young women or teenagers. And so the fact that he was a sex offender living in the neighborhood really, concerned them. He was really nice to me. I had known him for at least a year before that time. They said that he was an ex-convict, and it seemed like he was working on making his life better. He had a Dodge Magnum that he drove at the time, so one day, around 2007 or 8, I got a call from my husband at the time who said Glenn got killed. So he said that our neighbor had been driving the car in an area, a Culver City area, and I guess he was followed by police, and the police person thought that pulled him over and thought that he was going for a weapon and killed him. He did not have a weapon in his car. He was not armed, and the only thing he had in his car was potting soil. And so that is where I came up with the title. This particular one, the cop was not white. Actually, in the Prince Jones artwork, the cop was black. I should mention that. And the cop that killed him was black. In the second artwork about Justin, I think the cops were white, but I'm not sure. And that happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The first one was Washington, D.C. This was Los Angeles, and the cop was not white or black. I believe the cop was Asian. But for some reason, I remembered it wrong, and I thought it was a Latina. So when I made my artwork, I actually made a Latina because I thought that would go with the story a little better and complicate, how he might have gotten killed. So the fact that he was a sex offender and he was killed by a female police officer. So I wanted to show the preciousness of the women in the neighborhood and the girls, and this sort of like dainty sexuality. Yes, I know it's kind of like cliche that they're in like kind of like ballerina dresses, but that's what I was going for. And a lot of black people actually do take ballet, and like wear ballerina clothes. I'm a little bit more of the African dance type. That's more my taste, but everybody has their thing. So here I wanted to show that he liked to garden and make plants grow, and the marigolds represent like the Day of the Dead. Since I have a Latina cop, I referenced the marigolds, which have a symbolic significance in Chicano and Mexican culture, and which is very prominent here in Los Angeles. And it's actually one of the ways that I got inspired to paint, because I saw the Chicano Visions book by Cheech Marin's collection in 2003, and I just thought that the storytelling was so powerful, and I wanted to do the same thing. I was trying to be a screenwriter, and I was really struggling with that. I think I'm better at telling stories through paintings. So here I just show like again, I try to set the scene a little bit, and I show apartment buildings, and instead of Randy's Donuts, I call it La Cienega Donuts. And there are palm trees and cactuses, and here I have a dialogue here just representing the character kind of flirting with me as I walk through the neighborhood one morning. Okay, this artwork is called The Color of Jacarandas in South LA, and actually jacarandas are blooming in LA right now everywhere, and so I have these blues and purples and lavenders in the background to represent the flowers. And this particular artwork is about, I originally was going to do a play. So for a short amount of time in undergrad, I was focusing on playwriting. Before that's what led me to want to do the screenwriting, is that I started off in theater, in playwriting. And so I wrote a play, but then it didn't fit right with the composition. So I just decided to do it as like, continuous prose, but it's still a play. And it's really just relating what happened one night when I got pulled over by police while driving my friend's car. So it has everything in it that I was going for with much of the series, which is to reference healing plants and like black folk magic formulas for protection, and especially against the police and law enforcement and the criminal justice system. And it's actually one of my favorite pieces, even though it's a smaller work. So what happened in that is that I was driving my friend's car. He was actually driving her first, but then he saw the two white cops. It was nighttime, and he was like, uh-oh, we got to switch. And I was like, what? He was like, just switch places with me. So we turned the corner and like switch seats inside the car without getting out really fast at like Vermont and like Imperial, and the cops caught up with us, but by this time we actually had switched seats. So the cops like came to the car and they looked in, they were a little confused because I was actually driving at this point. And so, he asked the typical questions, can I see your ID? That kind of thing. And I gave him all this stuff. And then they looked through the back seat. They asked me to open the trunk and all this. And there was only like a pot of food on the back of the car because we had just cooked dinner, and he was taking me back to where I lived in Echo Park at the time. And so then the cop asked for, and he used a slang word for, and I didn't know what he was asking for. I was like, I'm sorry, what is that? And he was like, yeah, do you have any of this? And he asked the question again. I was like, I don't know what that word is. What does this mean? And he was like, do you have any marijuana? Clearly I'm a nerd. Clearly I'm just like, not that cool, because I really didn't know this slang word for marijuana. And I was like, oh no, I don't have any of that. And I'm really glad that I didn't have any. It wasn't legal in California at the time unless you had a card, probably, and I definitely wouldn't have had a card because I just said I'm clean. So my boyfriend started flirting. I mean, not flirting. He started trying to charm the cops, and I think he recognized something on one of the cops that showed that that person had been in the military. Or maybe he just started talking about his own experience as a Marine in the military. But I mean, he just started rambling, and it was like he was trying to show that he was a good guy and he had served the country and please don't mess with him. And so they did just let us go and everything was fine. But the car had a warrant on it because I believe his daughter had a whole bunch of parking tickets that, you know, had not been paid. And that's why we got pulled over. So this artwork is called Husband's Cousin. And I had been asking by this time I have an ex-husband. So the first ones that I started in this series, I was talking about, you know, my husband, but by now it's ex-husband. Anyway, so I had been asking him if he ever made any raps about his cousin who had been killed by police. And I really wanted to incorporate one of his raps into the artwork, the same way that I included the writing in my others, but I wanted to include his own personal artwork about his cousin. Writing. And he didn't have anything that he didn't have a rap that he could share with me, but he ended up writing me an email that had like probably 1,500 words about what happened. And at first I thought about including it in the artwork, but then I kind of changed my mind. It was just so incredibly personal. And the other thing is that I don't remember Kazi specifically. Although everyone was like, he was always around, you don't remember him? And I didn't remember him. So I did actually talk to his brother on the phone as I was creating this artwork. And it was kind of to ask for permission to use the text from my ex, you know, in the artwork. But then I decided not to use the text. So really, the structure of this composition is inspired by a music video by Kendrick Lamar. And the song is called All Right. And in the video, there are white police, that are holding up a car. They're carrying the car on their shoulders, and there are 4 young black men inside pouring libations on the ground. Libations are a way of saying pouring beer on the ground, but it's like you do that when someone dies to show respect. So instead, that was what stimulated the idea, but I really wanted to do an artwork that really more symbolically address the whole entire justice system, like the criminal justice system. So here I have, like, instead of just the police, I have people that appear to be, or can be read as being judges and or lawyers or professionals, you know, because I think that sometimes police get unfairly, too much is unfairly put on them when we really need to critique and reform the whole entire criminal justice system. So inside the limo, I have the family as if they're going to a funeral. And then here I have this sort of like memory of like family. So this is one of my ex-husband's most fond memories of his own cousin. And it was a pillow fight that they had where his cousin got mad because he was so little and he was losing the fight that he went and he filled his pillowcase with heavy stuff to come back and, like, you know, join the pillow fight. I didn't actually put that part about him going away, but I just put the joy of the pillow fight and being with his siblings and his cousins here. The people are green because I wanted to just complicate the read a little bit more in terms of the race of the people, because when we talk about the criminal justice system, yes, there are problems that are skewed especially for African Americans and for Native Americans. But I wanted it to be focus more on the concept of the criminal justice system itself rather than just the race part. And it is kind of like LA in this setting, but in actuality, his family decided not to have his funeral in Los Angeles because they didn't want any association with gang violence. So he was actually buried in Texas. The service and the burial actually probably happened both in Texas. I'm not exactly sure about that, but. So this artwork is about a good cop. So my series is called Home Remedies for Driving While Black, and there are 18 artworks in this series on this theme of police violence. This one is about a cop who walked the beat in my neighborhood when I was growing up. And she had a gold tooth and a jerry curl. She was black. She had a big smile, and as far as I remember, she was well liked. She was one of my grandmother's customers at her restaurant. It was just a small, small town soul food cafe. And she actually witnessed what happened when I was hit by a car when I was 4 years old. So apparently a man had stolen a car, and he ran a red light, and he may have hit me. I'm saying he hit me, but I don't actually remember feeling the car hit me, but I do remember rolling on the ground and hitting the curb, and I saw my grandmother running, and then the policewoman came up and she called an ambulance on her CB and also reported the license plate of the car. And so I was taken to the hospital. I remember, kids in the hospital. And then after, when I came home, which was that night or the next day, I couldn't walk for a week. And my grandmother, this woman here, she was obese, and but she actually carried me for a whole entire week. And she was taking care of me at the time, like raising me by herself. And she had never carried me before, so it's a fond memory for me to be carried by my grandmother. I don't know how she did that. She was like 60-something years old, and a big woman. Anyways, at the end of that week, the man who hit me came to visit the house. Because I made this so much longer after my grandmother passed away, I couldn't ask her how that meeting actually happened, like how that got set up. But he came to the house, and he just removed his hat when he came in. He was very respectful. My grandmother had the kind of house where she always had company in and out of the house anyway. And he sat down on a chair, and he was there for a long time, and he apologized, and he sat down, and he just, paid his respects. I really don't know what happened to him after that. I don't know if he went to jail or not. I don't know anything. I remember that he came in and he was wearing a rusty orange bell-bottom outfit and an Applejack hat. And so that's what I put here. And, I was probably playing with toys and sitting on the bed or a chaise lounge. And, again, in keeping with my interest in African-American folk magic, I put in references to a formula for keeping safe during travel. And so this is a gree-gree bag, which has something in it called ash tree, herb, and then there's also a sweetgrass flower. This is something that I saw in a recent trip through the Gullah Islands, which is off the coast of South Carolina and Georgia. And those are kind of like for good luck. And I saw them on the church of the Emmanuel Church, where the young white kid killed 9 black people in Charleston. They were there with other flowers and other things memorializing the victims.